So looking around the Linux world at the moment, you'll probably notice a weird spot in terms of where Linux development is at, especially with some of the biggest players in the game. I'm thinking, of course, of recent news with Linux Mint, with how their development team just seems a little bit stifled, and obviously around the community there is a little bit of uncertainty around Ubuntu's future. Now, nothing that's actually firm enough to get too worried about. Ubuntu isn't going anywhere anytime soon, but it does raise the question in my mind: why do we need multiple Linux distributions? And I'm thinking about that question, particularly framing today's video, which is looking into Solus 4, Fortitude. It came out a few weeks back now, probably almost a month ago. And the Solus project, the reason why I started with that question is because Solus is a completely independent project. It doesn't rely on any one distribution to make it happen. You think about the way that Linux Mint kind of depends on Ubuntu, and you think of how Ubuntu in turn sort of depends on Debian. And when these distributions start to show cracks in their core architecture, or possibly just start to lose momentum in terms of development, it can be very tempting to give up on a distribution altogether. And I think that's where distributions that are independent, like Solus, really come into play. So today what I'm going to look at is I'm going to be digging into Solus for a little bit, what makes it unique for those of you who maybe don't know. And if you are familiar with what Solus is doing, then let's take a quick update to see what has changed. So before I go any further though, I want to give a shout out to today's sponsor, who is Skillshare. I'm sure many of you have heard of Skillshare by now, but if you haven't, let me illuminate you. So Skillshare is an online learning community with hundreds of educators, literally over 25,000 courses in lots and lots of different topics, ranging from creative, business, technology, and lifestyle. And for me in particular, these streaming video courses offer a lot in terms of upskilling myself in Linux, because honestly, even though I've been playing with Linux for a while, there's still a lot about the system that I don't understand. And when it comes to upskilling myself in terms of Linux admin and being able to manage systems across a network, a course like this one, Linux Admin Bootcamp by Jason Cannon, is incredibly useful. So being able to come into Skillshare, find a video streaming course that works for me, gives me the skills that I need, is really, really helpful. Whether you're a beginner and you need some Linux terminal commands, or whether you want a full-on Red Hat server admin course, chances are Skillshare will have something to offer you. Even the more creative route, such as using GIMP or Inkscape to create some wicked graphics, they'll be able to help you out there as well. So what I would encourage you to do is, if this kind of stuff interests you, then definitely check out the link in the description and in the first comment below. And that will link you through to start a 2-month free trial of Skillshare Premium. So you'll get 2 months of Skillshare for free. So what are you waiting for? There's always room to grow. Jump down in the description, click on that link, and start finding a course that interests you. And special thanks to Skillshare once again for sponsoring today's episode. Okay, now for those of you who aren't familiar with Solus as a project, it is an independent rolling release Linux distribution. So it doesn't have any infrastructure borrowed from other operating systems. It definitely tries to be the most efficient Linux distribution out there. It focuses primarily and basically solely on the desktop. And to that effect, a lot of the architecture and a lot of the software is very well curated. Now, I've talked about Solus before. In fact, I ran Solus as my go-to operating system for almost 9 months of last year and in 2016 as well. And the things that I appreciate most about Solus still apply. So I will chuck some links up in the cards of other videos that I've done on Solus so you can get up to speed with that, because I don't really want to tread over the same ground here. What I do want to talk about very briefly is what is new in Solus 4. So first of all, Budgie, the homegrown desktop environment that is developed by the Solus team. Now, obviously you can get Budgie, the Budgie desktop, on an Ubuntu-based distribution using Ubuntu Budgie. You can also find it on Manjaro and a bunch of other distributions, but Budgie's home is here on Solus, and if that tickles your fancy, then you'll definitely enjoy the home team advantage here. So some of the new changes that have come through with Budgie version 10.5 are definitely front and center here with Solus. So in terms of the notification center, you have a little bit more control about how these notifications show up and how you can dismiss them. So dumb things like your power being unplugged and plugged in, that's no longer going to stack up here in the software, in the notification center. You'll also be able to get the choice to dismiss notifications grouped based on which app they come from, or you can actually dismiss obviously individual app notifications one at a time, instead of it just being a all or nothing option like it was before. The other thing is that they've done a few modifications to the icon task list, and this is a tricky one, and very few desktop environments actually manage to get this one right. When it comes to how to manage these jump lists, I believe that's what we started calling them from Windows 7 days, but being able to right click on an app here in the taskbar and how this behaves when you have multiple windows open. For example, I've got 2 instances of Firefox open right now. If I right click it, I get shown which windows are running under Firefox, and then I can not only choose to start up a new instance, but I can also choose to unfavorite or unpin that app. It also then gives me an option to close the current window that I am working on, or close all windows of that particular app with one click. So again, it's a very elegant solution for a common desktop problem. The other little tweak that I like is that when you mouse over a particular app and you have multiple instances open, if you roll your mouse over it and then roll your mouse wheel, it will switch between the windows that are open. Again, it's a nice little productivity tweak that you can use to maximize the windows that are on your taskbar without too much friction. Okay, now other little bits and pieces that are very minimal, really. When it comes to handling Nightlight, we've seen versions of different desktop environments incorporate some sort of Nightlight into the distribution. When you have it enabled in Solus, you can actually have an option now where if you use an app full screen, let's say a game or a full screen movie, it'll actually temporarily disable the Nightlight feature until you close the window, and then it will resume. This is to make sure that you get some color accurate games and movies when you want them. And finally, you also get there's been some major work done with the sound panel, and you can also maximize the volume well above 100% now, which is, again, kind of on trend with what we've seen with other distributions. There's also been a few other tweaks in terms of how Budgie manages its different desktop settings. There's a bit more customization now, which is probably the number one thing that a lot of people requested about the Budgie desktop in the past, is that it always seemed that little bit restricted. And as each release rolls around of the Budgie desktop, we get more and more options, which is great to see. And as you can see, there's a lot of toggles here that you can jump into and have fun with, including some of the ones that I've already mentioned. They've also tried to apply more consistency of their theming and their icons and their widget set across the entire desktop, regardless of what backend the app uses that you are trying to open. Now, there's a bunch of updated software, and there's an updated kernel and all of that kind of stuff. And that's kind of the stuff that we'd expect. But what I want to discuss is where Solus fits in the overall Linux ecosystem. And I guess at the same time, I want to address one of the most common criticisms that people have to any Linux distro review on the internet ever. And that is, why do we need another Linux distribution? The world would be so much better if we only had one or two and they were excellent, rather than reinventing the wheel 50 times over. And I think Solus is a great counter argument for that point. And I say that because here we have a distribution that is entirely, it's very much homegrown. Obviously, it borrows a lot from the GNOME project. But even if the GNOME project was to disappear overnight in terms of the desktop that we all use, Solus would kind of tick on regardless. They do have a Mate version, they do have a GNOME version, but their Budgie system that they've grown from the ground up is very focused. A lot of people enjoy using it, and they keep adding features to it that impresses its core user base. And not only that, but the actual system itself, in terms of its package management, the way that it loads things into the system, the way that it manages its kernels, All of this is homegrown based on what the desktop user needs, at least according to the Solus team. Now, I do want to, I guess, counter myself by saying that in the best way possible, Solus is a great example of how an independent Linux distribution can kind of ride over all of the storms that might plague bigger Linux distributions or more well-established projects. In terms of what happens to big name Linux distributions doesn't really affect Solus, it just keeps on ticking. At the same time, Solus is also a great example of the weaknesses of an independent distribution. Now, traditionally speaking, this would be the part where I'd say that it doesn't have as much third-party support from other apps, and I would say, honestly, that's pretty slim these days. You can install most things that you want in Solus, no worries at all, and they have a pretty decent amount of documentation and third-party app support from their website. Now, what I will say though is that last year was a struggle for Solus, purely based on the limitations of their development team. They had a major overhaul of their total infrastructure, of who was leading the development team, and there was quite a season there of uncertainty around the distribution. And because of that, the development of the distribution definitely slowed down. Now, I'm happy to report that they have improved and completely rehauled a lot of things, and they seem to be on track now for reaching their particular goals. So it seems like Solus is happy sailing ahead, but I think it provides the perfect example of how the Linux world needs distributions like Solus that can ride above and beyond the politics or the business models of larger distributions, and it gives people choice. If people don't want to log themselves into something that is owned by a big Linux company like Red Hat, or they don't want to be a part of Ubuntu's experiment, or they don't want to be subject to Linux Mint's design choices, then they can use something like Solus and be completely independent. Now, obviously the same argument could be said about Arch or Void Linux or whatever else, but I feel like there's a certain group of Linux users that have used it for an awful long time who are happy with the choices that the Solus team are making and enjoy the benefits of the curation that the Solus team provides. Whether it's the curated software center, the very, very efficient package management, the way that those packages interact with the system, the way that the system is completely stateless. There's a lot of efficiencies that Solus has as a leg up over a lot of the other distributions out there. Same time, there is also limitations to what the development team can pull off in a timely manner. And on that note, if you're looking for a rolling release distribution, there's only so much that Solus Desktop can give you, as their software is relatively up to date, but it's definitely not bleeding edge. If you're looking for a proper rolling release with very up to date software, then you're probably going to be best looking at something like Manjaro or Arch or something along those lines. In terms of drivers and gaming support, Solus has always held this as a bit of a strong suit because of the fact they have these Linux Steam integration that, again, homegrown and is something that is very prized by Solus users. It is meant to give you a little bit of an edge when it comes to running Steam on your Linux system, and it goes without saying that the interest of gamers seems to be very well considered in Solus's priorities. So what are you going to lose out on? Here's a scenario for you. Let's say Linux Mint grinds to a halt or gets forked again or slowly fades away into the distance. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but let's just pretend for a minute it does. And let's say that Ubuntu gets sold to a big company who eventually ends up turning it into something else. What would be your fallback distribution? A lot of people don't like the architecture and the kind of the willy-nilly approach of Arch Linux or Gentoo. Some people do like a curated, well-designed system. I feel like that's the kind of space that Solus lives. So why do we need multiple Linux distributions? Honestly, I think at the end of the day, it's about keeping each other in check. It's about being able to push Linux innovation further and not be dependent necessarily on one another. Now, at the same time, I know how many benefits there would be if everybody who developed a Linux OS could just unite on one project, and of course the progress would be immense. But when priorities change, and they do, the freedom to choose is fundamental to what using Linux is all about. So if I can have a system that's well curated, runs incredibly well, I don't have to update it, I don't have to try and manage it, I have access to all of the programs that I need, I can install Lutris and Steam for all of my gaming requirements, I'm a happy camper. And I think this is the kind of thing that you can expect from running an OS like Solus 4. And as the team push ahead towards the version 11 release of the Budgie desktop, I have great expectations for what the future of the Solus project is. But for right now, go and try out Solus 4. Let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you all in the very next video. Peace out, ladies and gentlemen.